Hi folks. As promised, the second part of the stories about stalkers. I like them no less than in the first. Some are even better. Rate it yourself. Yes, I've actually had a stalker, and I'm one of the rare and unfortunate male victims of what legally is known as a fixated person. It all began when I first started my career as a radio DJ whilst in my early 20s. It was only for a local radio station that covered my home city and the surrounding area. So the show I ran wasn't nearly as widely received as national or digital stations, but we still got a couple of 100,000 listeners a day. And let me tell you, that was still a rush, knowing so many people could hear my voice. Like most radio stations, we ran a lot of phone-in style segments and competitions for our listeners, and it was through interacting with the public that I came to earn myself a few regular callers. Not quite people I'll call fans, since saying that about myself is way too cringy, but they were definitely people we relished talking to since they generated such excellent content. For example, there was this one older black lady, Phyllis. She had to be in her 60s or 70s. We got talking about how she was never married. A little playful flirting ensued, and before I knew it, the segment is going viral on local social media and beyond. I have to admit, the segments were hilarious, and for the most part, I enjoyed my interactions with our callers. But there was one girl who reminded me that being in the public eye, or ear in my case, can have some serious drawbacks. The girl only ever called in to try and talk to me, interrupting competitions, her calling events, and generally making a nuisance of herself. We started screening her calls, but she just found ways to call from different numbers, using a different name and sometimes a different voice, so she'd be able to get through undetected. It got to the stage where our producer actually took over on one of the calls off air, warning her that we'd have her charged with harassment if she didn't stop calling. That kinda worked, but it also kind of really didn't too. She stopped calling all right, but instead, she just started showing up in the parking lot and trying to talk to me after I got off work. She tracked me down at public appearances, caused all kinds of beef on our social media pages, and even picketed the entrance to the station, telling everyone who passed what a holes we were. Over time, her behavior went from innocent but irritating to outright vicious. She was not happy that we'd banned her from calling in, but instead of blaming the producer, everything involving the show was his call and his alone. She blamed me. She was so mad about it too. I'm talking frighteningly high rate, and as soon as my producer heard about it, he pretty much marched me down to the police department to file a complaint. He had 30 years of experience. He dealt with people stalking his DJs before. And it was honestly chilling when he said something along the lines of, "Look, either you deal with this now or it gets worse and worse until she eventually murders you. And since I don't have the time or the emotional capacity for that, we're going to the cops." I figured it'd be a relatively short and simple process of filing a report. Maybe a court date to file a restraining order or something. But as soon as we mentioned who the stalker was, the cop taking our statements looked up as if the name was familiar to him. My producer straight up asked him if she was involved with stalking prior to myself, and although he didn't give us a concrete answer, telling us that he put us in touch with a couple of detectives ASAP, that spoke volumes. The next day, I get a call from a detective telling me he was from something called the FTA, or the Fixated Threat Assessment Department. Basically the cops who deal with stalkers before they work themselves up to actually hurting their victim. And these guys had dealt with my stalker on a number of previous occasions. In fact, she was something of a regular customer of theirs, and they had some very, very bad news for me. Some stalkers remain a benign irritation for their victims, too obsessive to not let go, but too shy to actually act on their fixation. My stalker was not one of those. She had a distinct pattern to her behavior, and that consisted of her getting very violent very quickly. She'd managed to avoid outright incarceration because most of the crimes she committed were low-level property damage or theft, but she definitely had potential for actual bodily harm. One of her victims was subject to an attack in which she tried to spray industrial-strength solvent into the guy's eyes. I'm not sure how much permanent damage that would have done, but there was a clear intention to take his sight away from him for good. That's when I actually started to get scared. She was smaller than me, weaker than me, probably slower than me, but she still presented an actual risk. I couldn't remain vigilant and protect myself 24/7, and if I wanted to remain working on a public platform, I was just going to have to man up and accept that certain risks came with that. I came to the decision that I wasn't going to squander my radio career just because of one crazy. It had been my absolute dream since I was old enough to work the dials on my dad's car stereo. It was a hill worth dying on, even if the metaphor might someday turn literal. At that point, I got back in touch with the FTA cop to find out what came next. The one thing she didn't know about me was where I lived, and I intended to keep it that way. And what came next was like something out of a spy novel. A plainclothes cop came over to my apartment to teach me what amounted to counter-surveillance. It was all stuff you might imagine. Varying my routines home from work, making random turns and doubling back on myself. Varying my schedule so a person wouldn't be able to track me by my schedule. Basically, I had to break up any kind of patterns in my life. I know that doesn't sound like much, but trust me, try planning your entire life around a violent stalker for 3 months. You'll see what it does. The lack of actual control over everything, feeling like everything I said or did might be compromised, or how the toxicity of it seeped into my interpersonal relationships, how it made having any kind of romantic life completely impossible. It doesn't feel so bad at first. The problem is it creeps up on you. You don't even know the stress is there until one day you wake up to an extremely painful rash on your rib cage, one so painful you need actual opioid painkillers to deal with. Stress-induced shingles, my doctor called it, and asked me if I had anything weighing on my mind. The question was so on the nose that I actually laughed a bit before I answered. Thankfully, she never did figure out where I lived. Then, one day, it just kind of stopped. No more following, no more phone calls, no more anything. Apparently, a radio station across town had hired a new guy, and she became fixated on him. Once I found that out, I called and gave him a friendly heads up, basically giving him the same advice my producer gave me. Look, either you deal with us now, or it gets worse and worse, until she eventually murders you. And since I don't have the time, or the emotional capacity for that, we're going to the cops. I had a stalker in secondary school. Well, not quite to follow you everywhere and make a shrine out of your hair kind of stalker, but enough to make me feel afraid for my safety on an almost daily basis. It made for a fairly terrifying 2 years before my mom got married, and we moved to the complete other side of London. He was this huge rugby player, very handsome, and extremely popular, so of course, there were absolutely no social repercussions for him. And people basically refused to believe that he'd pay any attention to me at all, let alone anything remotely abusive. When he started obsessing over me, most everyone brushed it off or made excuses for him, but it quickly became an absolute nightmare. He was always making comments towards me, pinching or pulling my hair when no one else was looking. It was creepy because he obviously didn't want anyone to really know what he was doing. He knew it was disturbed, and he knew it would make him look bad if it all came to light. Sometimes he'd say things like, "I can smell you. You're about to be on your period," or "nice and clean." Always in the creepiest, pervious way imaginable, as if it couldn't get more obvious that he was enjoying it. One of the scariest moments I can recall is when I was scanning the vending machine one morning before class. trying to figure out what to have for breakfast. He came up behind me, placed his hands on my waist, pushed me right up against the machine, and said very clearly in my ear, "One day, I'm gonna kidnap you, take you to the forest, tie you up, and screw you until you want it." That was 3 weeks before I moved. And the only thing that stopped me from going to the head teacher was the fact that it wouldn't be long until I never had to deal with this guy ever again. But I now know that that was the complete wrong approach. Even if you manage to escape someone like that, they just pick a new victim. And another, and another. They only stop victimizing women when they're actually confronted by authority figures. And even then, they might be psycho enough to just carry on. So please, if anything like this happens to you, report it to the relevant authorities. Even school staff take stuff like that really, really seriously and won't hesitate to get the police involved. They think that's the right course of action. It all started when I was living in Boston as a student attending UMass. I go to log into my university email account one morning, hoping that my requests for a term paper extension had been approved. Of course, there's nothing about the extension, but there is a little notification from Gmail saying that I had been logged in at a different location. This was kind of confusing since I only log into my Gmail account via my phone, my laptop, or the computer labs on campus. It was a Monday morning, and I had been on campus all weekend, so just how I was logged in at a different location was beyond me. I put it down to a glitch or something and just carried on with my day. Only these notifications didn't stop. I kept getting little banners on my phone popping up, informing me that login attempts had been made from an IP I didn't recognize. It only stopped when I changed my password to one of those overly complicated series of letters and numbers. That's when things got really weird. For 9 months out of the year, Boston is pretty much a rainy, miserable, sodden mess. So to aid in my mental health maintenance, I used to keep the blinds in my apartment closed pretty much all the time. Who wants to gaze out of their window at ceaseless drizzle? So you can imagine how strange it was that I'd come home day after day to find the blinds open. At first, I had furiously contacted the landlord and demanded to know why they were entering my apartment without permission. They flat out denied this, of course, and told me they always gave me 48 hours written warning when they needed to enter the property. I was getting pretty scared at this point, so I flat out asked the landlord who could be entering my apartment when I wasn't there. He paused for way too long, told me to call the cops immediately, then hung up. After the landlord phone call, all the weird stuff just dropped off for a while. I mean, I was convinced that I'd caught the landlord sneaking around my apartment. The fact his solution was to just call the cops told me everything I needed to know. Besides, you confront someone, the thing stops. That's as good an indication of guilt as anything, right? Wrong. So wrong. I get a text one morning from an unknown number. "Look outside," was all it said. I figured it's one of my friends with a new number or something, nothing to freak out over. So I just head downstairs to the front doors of the apartment building to see who's there. There's no one. Instead, there's a box of chocolates and a dozen roses soaking up the rain. That's when I realized just what had been happening the past month or so. I was being stalked. Stalked day and night by some creepy sociopath who had selfishly made me feel like I was the one going nuts. I was furious, way angrier than I'd mistakenly been with my landlord, who I ended up apologizing profusely to when the time came. I took their advice too, and I did finally call the cops, who, despite my skepticism, took my complaints very seriously. Turns out, the Boston Strangler still haunts the cops around Boston. Violence against women is something they abhor almost out of genetic memory now. Long story short, the guy who was stalking me was the head of the IT department at UMass, and therefore had access to all kinds of digitized files on the attending students. This included email addresses, phone numbers, term time addresses, and a plethora of other information. No wonder they'd been able to run rings around me. And they knew me almost as well as I knew myself. He was arrested, charged, and I got a restraining order against him. He was also subsequently fired from UMass and was barred from holding a job with any kind of educational institution for the rest of his life. This happened back when I used to get on Grindr, but it always reminds me of how glad I am that I'm no longer doing the online dating thing. For those unfamiliar with Grindr, it's a gay dating app that shows guys nearby. It makes you use your location while using the app, but it doesn't give your exact location unless you send it to the person directly. I got a message from a blank profile. No name, no pic, and no bio. The only thing that popped up was how close he was, less than a mile away. This happens a lot because there are a lot of close-headed guys out there, especially back then. Being an overweight guy in the gay community, I had to take anything I could because most gay guys in my community wouldn't even give me the time of day. He started off nice enough, introduced himself as Jesus, and asked how I was doing and all of that sort of small talk. He told me he was into chubbier guys, and after exchanging pics, we both agreed that we found the other one attractive. He asked me if I'd like to come over to play video games and maybe have some fun. I'd only met a couple of guys off of Grindr, and although we had some good times, it ultimately didn't pan out. However, I had met them somewhere public first, so I never met anyone at their place or had anyone come over to mine. I figured it had been long enough, and some casual fun might be nice. Plus, he was really cute and actually my type. He agreed to come pick me up since I'm only a few blocks away. Apparently, he lived in the nearby trailer park. I decided I'd like to shower first, and he said, "Oh, head over." Then he said he was really embarrassed to ask, but wondered if I'd be willing to lend him $20. Supposedly, he lived with his mom, and she had left for the weekend without leaving food money for him. I know it was really stupid in hindsight, but I felt kind of bad for him. I told him I didn't have any cash, but he said that was okay. I could just send him some money through an app. I don't remember what it was called, but it was something like Venmo. Though I went ahead and sent it, took my shower, and then let him know I was ready. He said he was heading out but couldn't find his keys. I said it was okay. I'll just wait outside for him. I hadn't given him my address yet, but I was almost ready to. However, when I asked if he had found them, he never responded. Minutes went by, then an hour. I messaged him again to ask if he was still coming, and I could see him going on and offline, so I knew he had read my messages. I finally just accepted that he was costing me and probably just wanted money. I messaged him one last time and told him that it was pretty messed up, as well as explained that had he just asked, I would have given him the money without having to go through all of that. What can I say? I can be a softie sometimes. Fast forward a couple of weeks. I never heard back from him, so I just blocked him. I got another message from someone on Grindr, relatively close to me. His profile was also blank, which raised my suspicions. He told me he was also into chubby guys, which really made me suspicious because it was highly unlikely two chubby chasers lived so close to me. We traded pics again, and it was a different guy. However, he suddenly asked for money again. And on Grindr, you could create as many accounts as you'd like. All you needed was an email address. There were tons of spam accounts on there that were a real pain. Anyways, I called him out because I was like 95% sure it was Jesus. At first, he acted like he didn't know what I was talking about, called me crazy, and then blocked me. I felt a little bad because I thought maybe I had made a mistake and just chased off a guy for nothing. Then again, his sudden offensive reaction made me have doubts. Weeks went by, and every so often, this same guy tried to fool me, even though I didn't fall for it. Eventually, I blew up on him and asked him what his problem was. We started going at it. And eventually, he said he wouldn't say that to my face. I told him that I would gladly tell him this in person, not that I expected him to actually show up this time. He responded with, "All right, we'll see about that. Be there soon." I was a little worried at this point because it crossed my mind that he may not actually be gay and might be some homophobe looking to bash some gay guys. My mind always goes back to those men who have lost their lives after meeting up with someone on Grindr. However, I realized I never gave him my address. No, this is the conversation we had. Me, nice try, but I never gave you my address. Him, yes, you did, stupid. You just didn't know it was me. Be ready, I'm on the way. At this point, my anxiety started setting in because I had given my address to a guy who had to cancel last minute, but I didn't think anything of it because it was before Jesus messaged me a second time. I tried to think about what to do, so I decided to try and document his threats. I responded, "I know I didn't give you my address. Besides, what do you want with me anyway?" He replied, "You'll see. I've got something for you." Now, the trailer park was always having police go by there, and my neighborhood was separated from theirs by a bayou. At night, I always heard gunshots out there, so I began to panic. What if he had a gun? What if he brought friends with him? I said, "Oh yeah. And what's that something that'll shut you up?" He responded, "I'm outside." I started freaking out because I couldn't tell if he was just trying to mess with me or if he really was outside. I had been screenshotting everything and sent it to the Grindr admins to report him for credible threats of violence. I wasn't sure if I should call the cops or not because if he was lying, I didn't want to look stupid. Plus, I wasn't sure if it was even enough for them to do anything. I decided to peek outside from the upstairs window and see if I could spot him. If I could get the make and model of his car, maybe I could at least have something to give the police. I lived in the middle of a cul-de-sac, so when I looked out the window, I could see all the way to the end of the street. When I looked out, I saw a car I'd never seen before parked on the side of the road at the end. My heart was pounding because I just knew it was him, but a part of me was hoping it wasn't. I decided I'd test him and see if he really was out there. He said, "I'm waiting." I responded, "I'm not sure what you mean. Where are you?" Of course, I wasn't being fully truthful, but if that was him, and he didn't know my address, then why wouldn't he just park outside my house? Sure enough, I was right. He said, "Yeah, I see you. You're gonna get it now." I replied, "Then give it to me. I'm right here. Just you wait." I knew he couldn't see me from his car because I was peeking out discreetly, and our windows have a privacy shade on them, where people only see a black screen from the outside. A few more minutes went by, and the car took off. I had a feeling that he used Grindr to triangulate the area of where my neighborhood was, but of course, he couldn't find my exact house because it hadn't been him who I'd given my address to. Grindr later sent me a message saying that he'd been banned from the app, and they'd contacted the local authorities. I never heard anything else after that, so I don't know what became of it. The cops never contacted me if they did pay him a visit, and I never heard from him again. Now I'm married, so I don't use Grindr anymore, thankfully. Still, it took a while before I was able to sleep soundly after that. I rarely left the house, and when I did, I always made sure his car wasn't around anywhere. This is one of the darkest chapters of my life so far, as the story of how my first real boyfriend stalked me for about 5 years after I broke up with him. The reason I broke up with him is that I noticed him becoming increasingly possessive and controlling. This worried me a lot, and I was a few years younger than he was, so I decided to get out. The breakup itself was so heart-wrenching. He cried and screamed and begged for me not to leave. Well, that just gave me all the reason to do so. He threw a full-on tantrum, and it only cemented that I've made the right decision. Initially, after the breakup, his behavior seemed like the harmless melancholy of a bitter ex. Constant texting and phone calls, sending gifts to my workplace, asking my friends to try to convince me to get back with him. The usual sort of thing. After about 6 months, this hadn't died down at all. It was this ongoing saga of drama and misery that I really started to get depressed about. I started bumping into him on my way home from work, or if I was out shopping. I had to move back in with my parents, just so he'd stop hanging around outside my apartment. I couldn't leave my job immediately, but moving back in with my parents didn't make a difference. Anyways, this behavior continued for a few years, becoming increasingly worse, and the police were very reluctant to do anything since they obviously classified it as some kind of domestic dispute. I ended up moving out of my parents and into a new place. After a few months, I even changed jobs twice, and somehow he always managed to track me down, no matter how careful I seemed to be. I didn't use social media, and even insisted friends of mine not take any pictures of me in case they posted them on their own social media accounts. I kept my phone number within my circle of friends, but somehow he always managed to get my new number. I ended up a paranoid wreck, thinking that one of my friends had betrayed me. We had a serious falling out, with me accusing him of prolonging the whole nightmare situation by showing more loyalty to my abusive ex. And then he had me. I called him things that no friend should call another. He hung up on me after a medley of curse words spilled from my lips. I ended up crying myself to sleep that night, unable to eat a single thing out of sheer stress. At this stage, I could barely sleep. I had no appetite. I couldn't concentrate at work, and spent most evenings drinking myself into a stupor. I was a shadow of my former self. Then another year passed, and as our encounters got worse, I decided to report him to the police again. Only this time, I had comprehensive documentation of his stalking, a mountain of text messages, etc. at long last, having already done the bulk of their jobs all on my own. The police finally took action on my behalf. A couple of months go by after I reported him to the police. I wake up one morning to a story in the Globe about staff at the state tax office were using resources improperly. My stalker ex was the main perpetrator, using his job to access all of my information. In his job, he had access to my tax records, which meant every time I changed job addresses or phone numbers, he had access to the most up-to-date information. What's more, he'd been using his position to swindle thousands of dollars in tax revenue into his own personal bank account. Before the court case began, he ended his own life, and I'm not ashamed to say I cried with relief. They were the worst years of my adult life, and I was just so glad that they were finally over. I met Lucy for the first time when she fell asleep on my arm on the bus. When she woke up, she gave me a really weird look before shambling off the bus. I figured she was weirded out that I didn't wake her sooner, so I kicked myself for being a creep and went on with my day. Can't win them all. I was thrown for quite a loop when her whole friend group was sitting by my usual spot on the bus the next day. Being an awkward teen, I wasn't about to turn down any kind of positive attention. I got to know her friends and ended up on good terms with her before I realized I hadn't asked her name. I'm hard of hearing, so I didn't hear her when she said her name. Lucy, right? Yeah, Lucy. And I had your typical high school courting process. This is to say she was overwhelmingly forward, and after a few weeks, I got the hint. As we were getting close, Lucy would fixate on learning about past heartbreaks and finding out about my personal life. I'm a serial oversharer, so I didn't really mind talking about myself, but she would constantly butt in by saying how messed up things were and that she kicked my friend's butt for hurting me. I was weirded out, Even at 16, I knew that was cringy, and I was going through my emo phase. The thing that really bugged me at the time was that she asked so much about me, and she would never say anything about herself. It made me feel terrible, always venting and never helping her out. During this time, she missed a few days, and I let another girl sit by me since it was an overcrowded bus, and I didn't think it mattered. When Lucy came back and saw me with another girl, you'd think she was shot. She just about ran to the seat behind us and started going off. I can't remember what exactly Lucy said, but the other girl never talked to me again after that. Once her rival was gone, Lucy reclaimed her spot next to me, and was all sunshine and rainbows. Nobody ever asked to sit in Lucy's spot after that. Lucy always had a crude sense of humor, but after a while, things started getting hurtful. She would take jabs at my insecurities, and any time I got upset about it, she would just continue to prod, just because I wasn't able to take a joke. These jokes usually stopped just shy of outright insulting me. When Lucy wasn't breaking me down, she was super affectionate. She would sleep on my chest while we rode home on the bus, and she'd even talk about herself from time to time. I don't remember the first time she hit me. It seems like something that would be burned into my memory, some kind of cinematic moment in my life. Honestly, it all just blended together after a while. I know it started off small though, flicking me and playful slapping. But by the end of it, she would elbow me in the ribs for telling a bad joke. It didn't register as anything abusive until she slammed me into a wall while we were walking through the hallway after class. She told a terrible joke, and she shoved me hard into the wall. She laughed because of the sound I made before shoving me again. People were going through the halls with us, but they didn't do anything. Sometimes I wonder what they thought of me. I didn't dump her after the hallway incident, but I did start standing up for myself. We started getting into a lot of fights after that. Of course, they only ever ended in one of two ways. She was right, or it was an honest mistake. I tried to break things off a few times around that time, but every time I did, she had a new sob story I hadn't heard before that made her actions totally understandable. I let it get in my head that she was some tragic soul, and that I could help her. I convinced myself there was something noble about taking the abuse, and nobody I knew tried to step in and stop me. I finally got the nerve to dump her after 3 major things happened within a 3-week span. First, I found out she was taking pictures of me while I wasn't looking and posting them online. The weird thing was, I only found out because she showed me. It felt gross seeing a bunch of nearly identical pictures of me not facing the camera. The way she showed me was worse. She seemed excited, like I'd be happy she invaded my privacy. The second weird thing happened when I tried to wake her on the bus after about a half hour on my chest. Not saying anything, I nudged her shoulder since we were at her stop, and she just got up, looked me in the eye, and told me she wasn't asleep. Combined with the pictures, that seemed really weird to me. She didn't try to be cute or romantic about it or anything, just I pretend to sleep on you sometimes. That just really weirded me out. The breaking point came when she was showing off some awards she got from school. There was something off about the award. It didn't have her name on it. Oh no, it had a name. It even had a picture of her smiling on it. The problem is, it wasn't addressed to Lucy. You can imagine what I felt when I found out I didn't know my girlfriend's name. A few days later, we got into one of our usual fights, and I broke things off. Lucy always was the persistent type. She would sit a few rows behind me on the bus and stare at me while I went to my car after getting off the bus. Looking at her wouldn't make her stop. It felt like she wanted me to know she was watching me. One day, when she got on the bus, she looked me right in the eyes for a solid 20 seconds while she walked past me to her new seat. I'm pretty sure she was expecting me to say something to her. The next year, I graduated and got a retail job. End of story, right? I thought so too. It was the start of Christmas season, and I was working cashier that night. Lucy, or so I thought her name was, came into the store I was working at, random chance. It had been a year and a half since we broke up at this point, so it wasn't happy to see her, but surely we could pretend it wasn't weird. She gave me the look the squirrel in Ice Age gives his nut. She grabbed something from the front and went right into my line. She didn't say a word to me, but she wouldn't break eye contact, and she was swaying like an excited toddler. It hurt to look at her. I rang her up silently and waited for her to leave. Then I looked at the other cashiers for support, and he told me she was giving her weird vibes. I got this really bad gut feeling after she left. Lucy became a regular at her little shop. She would come in and creep out my coworkers. Lucy never really tried to hide what she was doing. One of the cashiers mentioned how often she came while ringing her out, and she said she was visiting me. She didn't say my name, but she described me. After that, whenever she showed up, someone would make a note of it on the radio. She was usually in one of the areas bordering my workspace. I heard about her a lot more than I saw her, so I think she was hiding from me. She never got banned from the store despite complaints, because the managers were penny pinchers who would sell any one of us out to get sales up. I know Lucy was responsible for at least one resignation from my workplace. Someone who looked like me caught her staring a few times and heard how often she came. After a while, I guess the stress just wasn't worth minimum wage. The last time I saw Lucy at the store was a little over a year ago. I was hanging out with one of the girls in the back while we were loading up carts with stuff we had to stock. We were right by the back entrance, so you could see right in from the store proper. I left, put up the stuff in my carts, and when I came back, I saw her. She was standing about 40 feet from the back entrance, still as a statue. I froze when I saw her. I watched her stare into the back for what felt like hours before she suddenly turned and walked briskly away. The girl I was talking to was still in the back when I got back. She was a lot more awkward after that. That girl quit 3 days later and just about crushed my ribs when she hugged me goodbye. She hated her job, so I'd like to think it didn't have anything to do with Lucy, but I'll never know. I left the store not too long after that and got a job that didn't involve customer service. That wasn't the last time I saw her, though. Over the summer after taking my new job, I had a mental breakdown. I convinced myself that I was unlovable and that Lucy was really the only person I could possibly be with. I left the house without any conceivable plan to find her. Well, stars in the sky lit by street lamps, I saw her. She was with another girl. I got so close I could almost touch her before I snapped to my senses. I thought about her stalking me at the store, and I realized I was becoming her. I ran home. I cried that night. The last time I saw Lucy was last week. I was walking home from work and decided to stop for dinner. I thought I saw her in line, but convinced myself it was someone else. I ordered and sat down to eat. I was looking out the window while I ate, and she took the table between me and the window I was looking out. She was with some guy that looked vaguely familiar, maybe a school friend. She was set at an angle so she was half looking at him, and every few seconds, she would look right at me. I knew it was her. She changed her hair. It looks an awful lot like mine now. After I finished, I went to the bathroom because I felt sick. After washing my hands, I looked in the mirror, and I felt like I could die. It hadn't occurred to me before, but I was wearing my work uniform complete with the company name on my hat in big letters. She was reading my hat. Lucy hasn't been in my current job yet, but I'm sure she'll turn up eventually. I'm moving soon, so I'm just hoping I'm not here anymore when Lucy turns up. Lucy has been a part of my life for the last 4 years. We dated for 4 months in high school, and she just keeps turning up. I wasn't a paragon of mental health before I met her, but I feel like she broke me as a person, and I'll never forgive her for what she did to me. Since her abuse and her stalking, I've developed serious trust issues. I get painfully nervous leaving my house, and people who show interest in me immediately put me on edge. I tried to date since everything happened, but I just can't. I'm too much work at this point, so I've decided that I'll stay single until I can work through my issues. But I'm begging you, Lucy, or whatever your name is, please leave me alone. I remember my first summer after my boyfriend, and I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment together. It was almost heaven. It didn't matter the kitchen was too small or that the neighbors were too noisy. We finally had a place we all could call home. One morning, I decided to sleep in while my boyfriend got ready and left for work. But due to it being a sweltering summer morning, I had the bedroom window open to allow for a bit of fresh air to get into the apartment. As I tried to drift back to sleep, I was startled awake by our doorbell ringing. I tried to ignore it, hoping whoever it was would just go away. But it kept ringing. I figured it could have been a package that I needed to sign for, so grumbling away to myself, I pulled some clothes on and went to look out of the peephole. Nothing. No one there. I cursed myself for delaying. I gave up on sleeping and decided to hop in the shower. At about midday, I went to go open the sliding glass door that leads to the concrete slab that serves as our patio. We had cats, and keeping it closed was super important. So as you can imagine, it was very odd that when I opened up the glass door, I noticed that the screen door was slightly ajar. I promptly closed it, making a mental note to chastise my boyfriend before opting to soak up some sun. My boyfriend finished work around 4 o'clock. I was taking a break from sunbathing, sitting on my iMac at a desk with the window that faces the building parking lot. As I said, it was really hot that day, and I had the bedroom window wide open. When he pulled into the parking lot, I heard him and another female voice start to have a conversation. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I'm hardly the jealous type, and we're pretty friendly with the neighbors, even the loud ones, so I just stayed in place and waited for him to walk up to the apartment. When he did, he was very upset. His psycho ex-girlfriend had been waiting for him in the parking lot. I had no idea this girl even existed. He'd failed to ever mention her for as long as we've been together. I came to find out this wasn't him being deceptive. He just didn't want to bring up such painful memories. But the really creepy part is that she tried to invite herself inside. When he told her no, she started off on some frenzied rant about how it was because there was another girl living there, how she knew he was seeing someone else, and how wrong that was. I hadn't answered the door. I hadn't done anything all day but wake up, take a shower, sunbathe, and sit on the computer, all in an area with the window blinds. But if you were to get really, really close to the bedroom window, you can kind of see through the blinds. I'm convinced that she was snooping around the apartment that day. It seems way too much of a coincidence that the screen door was open after the doorbell rang so many times. Then she just shows up and somehow knows we're living here, all within a few hours. No way she was in our apartment while I was sleeping. I just can't prove that beyond all doubt. I'm glad I didn't answer the door that day, but that feeling is dwarfed by how relieved I was when I heard she'd moved a few states over for work. Now we might actually find some peace together in our little slice of heaven. Unless, of course, she comes back. I went to Paris on my gap year back in 2017. I was there for about 4 days, and it was April, around the time of the Champs-Élysées terrorist attack, where 3 policemen were shot. I happened to witness this from inside a store when it happened and had to walk back to my hostel. I was 19. Anyway, my second day there, I think I had tickets to the Louvre. I set off in the morning, extremely excited, then not at all daunted by anything. It was my first time traveling alone out of the country. In general, I'm British. I loved it. I had Google Maps out, walking the whole way. It was about 45 minutes, but I didn't mind. About 15 minutes in, I'm walking and a guy notices me, calls out a whistle, and smiles at me. Okay, I would be annoyed, but I'm in Paris. Who cares? I carry on walking. A few minutes later, he appears next to me, smiling and saying hi. He's about early to mid-20s, very tan skin. I say hi back, surprised, thinking he must have been following me. Strange. We began to talk, and I tell him I'm here traveling and going to the Louvre today. He asked me a lot of questions, can't remember exactly what about, but we had the general conversation in my very, very poor French. I asked him why he's following me. Doesn't he have somewhere to be? This doesn't faze him. He smiles and carries on talking, saying he doesn't have anywhere to be. Okay. He starts saying I should go to dinner with him tonight. I say great. In my head, that's not going to happen. So I decide to start playing around with the conversation. I asked, "Do you smoke?" He looks surprised and says, "Yes." "Do you?" Keep in mind, his English is really poor too, which I thought was odd because why would you attempt to talk to someone in English and find out about them if you know you can't that well? Oh well. I look up smoke in Google French and say, "Do you smoke ganja?" He looks slightly confused but laughs and says, "Oh yes, you come with me and we can smoke later," he says. I laughed too, thinking, right, mate, I don't smoke. This was funny to throw him off a bit. He also doesn't know his way around, which was odd, had no idea where the Louvre was. I didn't bother to ask him his life story, so who knows? Never found out where he came from. I told him I have tickets already. I'm going straight in. I don't know why you're following me. He doesn't mind this and continues and says, "Oh, wait for me. We can go for dinner later. You can come back to my apartment and meet my friends. We can smoke." Okay. We get there. My heart is beating a little faster at this point. I'm alone in a different country. What do I do? Well, the entrance to the Louvre has a big open space full of people, which was slightly comforting. I finally see where you get your tickets at a kiosk. This is the first time I straight up walk away, ignoring him, and go there. There's an older guy who speaks English there for tourists, obviously. I say hello. I'd like my ticket. Blah, blah, blah. He could have been English for all I know, but my mind was going too fast a pace to notice. The guy now stood at a distance watching me. I looked the man straight in the eye as he asked me a question, and I say, "There's a man following me." His expression changes, and we keep eye contact the entire time. He says, "Where?" I say, "To the far right." He glances and looks back at me. He asks a few questions. I say, "Well, I'm going there straight away, so what's he doing?" He tells me to go straight in, don't talk to him, and walk away. I agree. The guy suddenly comes right up to me and says, "What's going on?" or something. We don't break eye contact. And the man says, "Hey, are you gonna be okay?" I change tone and say, "Yes, thank you so much." The guy continues to follow me. But at this point, I'm over it and leave him behind. Going down an escalator, I see him watching me and looking around. The weird and kind of sad thing is, I tried to tell all of the security they had, which was a lot, down to the entrance. There's a man following me. What do I do? A French lady behind the desks, who stamps my ticket, says, "Ticket, please. Make your way downstairs." Fine, with no one listening to me. I go to a security desk in the Louvre itself and say the same. This lady talks to me, asks my information, then proceeds to tell me he was probably trying to rob me. In broad daylight, following me for over 30 minutes. Come on. There's a cold feeling all over my body at this point, but I'm safe and sound inside. They had numerous soldiers with guns walking around the place and outside too. So, to an extent, I wasn't in serious danger. But once again, being alone, young, my hostel far away. If I told him where I was staying, which he continuously asked for, but I didn't tell him, something else could have happened entirely. I'm so glad I got to enjoy the rest of the trip. Safer than the shooting, without much hassle. I still haven't told my parents. My mother would freak. So, like a lot of people, I have a Discord account. It's got my first name on it, and a picture of myself there. Mostly because I only used it to talk to IRL friends, so I didn't care about my face being there or anything. Recently, I decided to try Minecraft for the first time in 4 years, because my friends were talking about an upcoming update, and they wanted us all to play it. I figured I would hop on early and get familiar with some of the new mechanics and stuff. I found a server and was playing on there for about 4 days before I got told that they give you in-game rewards for linking your Discord account to their server. So, blinded by shiny stuff, I joined their Discord server. It had about 400 online users, so I wasn't really worried about people seeing me at all. And I was pretty low down the list alphabetically. As I got more used to the player base, I got more comfortable talking in the server via text chat. They had a side channel that's supposed to make selling in-game items a little easier, so I made a message saying I was buying something. About 4 hours later, some guy added me with "I will give you something for free handsome," and a winky face. I didn't really know what to say to this, so I just said, "Okay, thanks. No problem," winky face was his response. Shortly after this interaction, this person kept requesting to teleport to me in-game, and when I'd asked why, he'd say, "I just want to hang out with you," or it'd be some kind of variation of that. He did this pretty much every time I was online, and he'd just follow me around my base for like an hour, asking me questions about random things. Then he'd go away. I'm not usually the type of player to speak to people at all when I'm in an in-game or something. I just keep quiet and get on with my own stuff. So it was really uncomfortable having this guy doing this. After maybe 3 days of this behavior, he stopped calling me handsome and decided to kick it up a notch and called me sexy in-game via PMs. I politely asked him if he could just stop calling me these things like that, and he didn't respond back. 2 hours later, he messages me asking how old I am. My hesitant reply was 21. No response again. I decided to get off for the night because I was tired. I boot up my PC about 2 days later and open Discord to see someone has PM'd me on there, and it's this guy again. He said hello and asked me to call them next time I'm online. I didn't. I just ignored his message, then closed the conversation. By this point, the guy was really freaking me out. I have really bad anxiety problems when it comes to people giving me attention, so I decided to just turn off my PC and watch some YouTube on my phone. The next day, I opened Discord because a friend wanted me to watch him play Hearthstone and give him advice. We did that for about an hour, then he got off. About 40 minutes later, the guy who was being weird to me tried to call me, and I had a complete brain fart and thought it was my friend calling, so I accepted it. I realized my mistake almost immediately, so I muted my mic. The guy is eating some potato chips from the sound of it, and after about 4 seconds of loud eating, he says, "Well, don't mute your mic. I'm curious to hear you speak," then lets out a small giggle. The guy was German and had a very weird and creepy tone of voice. It was like all high and quivery. He starts to talk about how attractive he thinks I am. By the way, I should have stressed this earlier. I really am not overly attractive like this guy was making out. I'm just a normal-looking dude. And then he talks about how I haven't been on in a few days. Then he puts a picture in the chat and says, "What do you think about that?" And it's a picture of his junk and a fleshlight or something. I immediately end the call and close Discord and was just freaking out internally. About 5 days go by, and I finally get back on the Minecraft server. And as soon as I get on, this guy messages me a smiley face. So I tap out and get the thought to open Discord and block this weirdo for good. When I open up the conversation, there's 8 unread messages from him, and like 5 of them quote unquote thinking of you. I just quickly block him, then quit Discord. I alt-tab back in the game, and luckily enough, there is a /ignore command, which is basically the same as blocking him. So I do that as well. This was just so weird and crazy, and it's my first experience like this ever. Even though it happened just under 2 weeks ago, I only fully got over it a few days ago. Like I said earlier, I get horrible anxiety when I get a lot of attention like that. What made it worse is that I was on an account that had my face on it and my first name, and the fact I've never been in a situation where I've gotten attention from the same gender like that before. At the time, I just didn't know what to do because I was so anxious. But thinking back, I should have just blocked this idiot immediately after he was making me uncomfortable. Because of this, I've enabled the setting on Discord where it doesn't automatically show images. I also messaged one of the admins of the Minecraft server telling them what happened, and they said they'll take action. What's worse is that this guy is actually a regular member of the server and a high-ranked. So it makes me wonder if I'm the only victim this weirdo has harassed like this. He could have done this before to a younger person. I'm a 19-year-old female with a gym-going boyfriend. Typically, I attend our local gym with him, but sometimes his work schedule makes it so that I have to go there by myself, which is normally not an issue until this one night. I arrived at the gym and immediately was welcomed by a man I've seen there before, smiling at me. Being the polite person I am, I smiled back. I've never taken notice of him before until tonight. Little did I know, smiling back at him would be a mistake. I carried on with my workout, but the whole time, I felt eyes on the back of me. Each time I looked around, I would catch his eyes meeting mine with the biggest smile on his face. I'm not talking about a cute little shy smile. I'm talking about a full-blown creepy grin. It was already late at night, and I wasn't in the mood at all, so I quickly finished my workout routine. Throughout this, dude was picking up every machine next to me and trying to get my attention. But I just cold-shouldered him. Once I was finished, I ran to the ladies' locker room, grabbed my keys, and ran as fast as I could to my car. Now my car is old, so when you start it, you're supposed to wait for the engine to heat up a little bit, but not tonight. I threw it in reverse and could hear the guy shouting, "Hey ma'am, hey." Next thing I knew, he was at my window, smiling at me with the most crazed look in his eyes I've ever seen in a person. In a stern voice, I asked what his problem was, and what he said sent shivers through me. "I know you have a boyfriend. I see you here with him, and I don't want you to think I'm following you at all. My name is David, and I promise I have no sinister intentions, but I just want you to know that I see that sadness behind your eyes, and every night I pray for you." At this point, I was shaking, and I just honestly wanted to run him over. I'm used to guys complimenting my looks, but never have I ever heard anything like that. I quickly said thanks and drove away. I called my mom in a panic, and she teased me, saying, "No, he likes you." What I had was a very bad gut feeling about this guy. I had to go to Walmart after to grab something quick, and guess who was there, basically waiting for me? David. He followed me from the gym to Walmart, and I was in the self-checkout line and called my mom up again. This time, she told me to stay on the phone with her and pretend that she's my boyfriend. So I told her what time I should be home, and that I loved her and couldn't wait to see her when I got home. But this didn't throw this guy off. He approached me and kept saying, "I need to tell you something," over and over again, until I snapped and yelled, "What?" What he then told me, "I would love it for you and your boyfriend to have coffee with me and hear my testimony." I had never been so scared in my life. He may not have followed me home, to my knowledge, but the fact that he followed me around the gym and to Walmart had scared me lifeless. My boyfriend and I went back to the gym to get his information, and the worker that night already had his information pulled up. She said she saw that I looked very uncomfortable and that he was eyeing me up the entire time and knew I would be back to report him. They canceled his membership, but I never filed a police report due to some bad encounters with the police in the past. My boyfriend ended up making a Facebook status to warn other young women going to the gym, and I thought it ended there. But David saw the post and ended up sending my boyfriend basically his whole life story, claiming he didn't have any romantic interest in me and other nonsense to get him to take the post down. We looked at his profile, and his bio box said, "I am not good, but he is," and that completely freaked me out even more. Like, what does that even mean? To make matters worse, he confessed to my boyfriend that he doesn't even live or work in our city, so it makes me wonder if he got kicked out of his local gym for doing this to other women. A month or so after, he messaged my boyfriend, claiming we would never see him again as he's going overseas. His intentions are still unknown to me, because who tells a stranger that you'd pray for them every night? It makes me wonder how many times I went to that gym alone while he was there watching me. David, if you hear this, I hope I never see or hear from your creepy self again, and that you stop approaching women who are alone like that. I still look over my shoulder every time I go home, and make sure you're not at my gym anymore before proceeding to work out. I also hope you're still not praying for me every night, especially after what happened. I'm very pale, tall and thin with brown eyes and shoulder-length black hair. I look so vulnerable and weak when you see me, which is really true. Often the reason why I always get stalked, touched, and catcalled. In our country, all public schools wear uniforms, which made people easily figure out if you're a student or not. If you're wearing your school uniform and it's weekdays, you're not allowed to enter any malls until about 5:30 in the afternoon. That's the reason why I was waiting for my uncle to pick me up from school and not hanging out somewhere else. My friends have also gone home that time. This particular day, well, I just lost a competition, a writing competition. I'm a campus journalist, and I'm in 9th grade, which you might say is lame. But as campus journalists, we're all required to join this competition annually. I'd always win and get on stage, but this year I lost, which made me really upset. The competition ended very early, so I texted my mom to say to my uncle to pick me up. Then I got out of school with my friends, and we went our separate ways. They'd all go the same way to their houses, and I'm the only one separated for them to walk the other way. My uncle said to always wait at the end of the school, because there he can always easily park. I walked there, really upset and waiting. 10 minutes went by, and my uncle wasn't there yet, so I checked my phone. My uncle just texted me he's going to be late because it's really heavy traffic, and the road is getting renovated. Great. I was just standing there waiting for another 5 minutes when two guys walked by. Then they saw me just standing there. I saw them just whispering to one another. Then they giggled, then came to walk back. They walked further away from me about 15 feet, but you could still really see them. I was already upset and getting annoyed, so I didn't really say anything to them. I could have just told them to go away or walk further, but I was really tired and annoyed, so I just continued standing there waiting. They started calling me, "What's your name?" from far away. I didn't answer and snobbed them, but they still kept insisting and calling me. They started saying, "Hey, what's your name?" Always snobby, huh? What, you feeling famous, huh? But this time I started getting both creeped out and annoyed. You gotta understand though, I'm scared. I couldn't move or speak. I don't know. It's just my body doing that. And I just stood there not even looking in their way. as if I didn't even hear them, and they kept insisting on my name. They started asking me what time it was. I still just stood them up and pretended I didn't hear them. Then they started walking towards me and stopped about 5 feet away from me and started whispering and laughing. Now I was starting to get scared. Mind you, I was the only one in that spot, with 2 creepy students talking and catcalling me. I felt so helpless, but I didn't even do anything. At the time, I was leaning my back against a yellow bar they used to block roads when they wanted that road closed. I was leaning on it, and the other guy sat on the bar and started shaking it madly. I still ignored them, but I stopped leaning against the yellow bar. They kept insisting what time it was. Hey, what time is it? And then they laughed. Another guy responds, well, it's time for you to die then. Then both of the guys started laughing. I couldn't believe what they said. I'm on the verge of bawling, and I've been waiting for my uncle for 20 minutes with these 2 creepy guys beside me. That's when I started texting my best friend, told him everything that happened, and he was so infuriated at the situation and at the guys. He wanted to pick me up, but he was on vacation in another country with his family, so he had no choice but just to give me advice. Then, when I was in the middle of texting, the guy walked in front of me and asked, "Can I ask what time it is?" while looking down. 4:30 yet. It's 4:30. I responded at a panic. That's when I realized he was looking at my ID that I was wearing. Good thing though, my ID was on its back, and you couldn't see my name and class section. I was so relieved with my ID was on its back. Then the guys started walking further away again. They started walking away again when they noticed a car driving near me, and it being my uncle. I walked away from me and looked the other way so they couldn't see me, and they just pretended like nothing happened. I quickly jumped in the car, scared to death and upset. This day handle had been the worst. I lost a competition and got catcalled by a bunch of creepy guys. My uncle drove away, and after a few minutes, I told my uncle what had happened. He was angry at the guys and wanted to come back to beat them, but I didn't want to go back there. And I was already having the worst day, and these guys might not have been there anymore, and who knows what they would have done in response. Now I know this isn't quite as scary, but when you're in this situation, and you just can't move or talk, you're scared and want to cry. But I felt helpless and numb. Thank you for listening. If you missed the first part of the Stalker stories, the link in the description. Click on the notification bell to receive notifications about all future stories. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday.